Hi James.
Hi Matt.
And hello everyone listening. Thank you for downloading Journey Through Sci-Fi. We're doing things a little bit differently this week. It's a bonus episode.
Bonus episode! Woo!
Me and James have both been out to see Ad Astra this week.
We have.
So we thought we'd get together and do a quick bonus podcast and put it out in the middle of our AI series.
Yes, we both ventured into the outside world, went into different cinemas, into sort of dark spaces, and then watched this film. And I really enjoyed it, actually.
Okay, I quite liked it.
Okay, excellent. We're off to a good start. This is going to be a good episode.
I think we should just add in as well. We don't normally put a spoiler warning in our episodes because I guess it's kind of implied, isn't it? But I think we should say, because it's a brand new movie, it's out in cinemas at the moment. We are going to be discussing it in great detail. We'll be covering every aspect of the plot, I guess. So,
spoilerific detail, as most people say.
So this is your warning. If you haven't seen it yet and you do want to see it, maybe just pause the podcast now and pick it back up when you've had a chance to watch it.
But if you have seen it and you're ready for some Ad Astra chat, then keep listening.
Yeah, you've come to the right place. So you said you liked this film. You were impressed?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect going in.
No, me neither. Definitely.
I hadn't read too much about it. I'd heard bits and pieces.
But it was being compared and is still being compared to some pretty heavy hitters.
Yeah. I think they're the most obvious comparisons given that it's a space film.
Yeah. Should we jump straight in and say that it is being compared quite a lot to 2001? And I'm not totally sold on that comparison.
Yeah, definitely, because it's got sort of like the idea of the Odyssey. It's a big journey. Ad Astra is about a journey. One man's journey. Yeah,
there is a journey, a very long journey through our solar system, which is the biggest sort of story link to 2001. And there's a few, there's bits in there, but it doesn't have the feel of 2001 at all. Yeah. It's much closer to Interstellar, in my view, which it's also being compared to.
Yeah, or something like Gravity. It's sort of like...
Yeah, I had a lot of similar feelings to Gravity. Certainly, well, the ending we'll get to, but there's a moment near the end that's very, very similar to the ending of Gravity, isn't there?
Yeah. So what other films have you heard it compared to? Because there's a few which have been floating around at the moment.
After the fact, after I saw it, because I don't like to read up on a film too much before I've seen it. After the fact, I saw it compared to Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
And I can see that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very accurate comparison. Obviously, it's one which is definitely being perpetuated by the director and the company which made it.
Yeah, I'm sure the director and the company don't mind the comparisons to 2001 and Apocalypse Now.
Definitely, because if you're going to be compared, you might as well be compared to two of the most epic films ever made.
Yeah.
So I think they're really they're gunning for those comparisons at the moment. But in terms of the story, it's very similar to kind of how Apocalypse Now works. Because in Apocalypse Now, the lead character is going on a journey to find this guy and to find out more about him. The Colonel. Yeah.
Did he used to? I haven't seen that in a while. Did he used to serve under the Colonel? Is that why they choose him?
I think that he's just a specialist.
Okay.
And he's known for sort of like finding out stuff.
So is there no personal connection between...
I don't think, because that's what makes it more mysterious.
Right. But in Ad Astra, that relationship is intensely personal, isn't it?
Yeah, which is really hammered home. And I think comparing it to something like 2001 is sort of like, it's a surface layer comparison, but Ad Astra is very on the nose with its themes and what it's trying to talk about in terms of its storyline. Whereas 2001, you can, like we said when we went through it in the podcast, you can interpret it in 1,000 different ways. There's a lot going on in that film.
Yeah.
Whereas Ad Astra is very much, it hammers home what it's about. It's like a father-son story, isn't it?
It is. It's interesting that you say that on the nose, because one of the things that I actually wrote down while I was watching the film, I had my notepad in the dark cinema making horrible illegible notes. I just wrote down the question, does this film need narration?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It really reminded me of Blade Runner. And I thought, is there a better version of this film that could exist where Brad Pitt is not narrating and he's just acting.
Because that is such a fundamental of it, isn't it? Throughout the whole film, Brad Pitt is narrating. He's telling you what's going on in his head, what he's feeling the whole time. Whereas the surface of his character is very much it's a facade, isn't it? Is what it's saying the whole time.
It's a very good facade, and I mean that in the sense of both. It's a convincing facade for the character. It's also a really, really good performance by Brad Pitt, in that he is performing a good facade, but his performance is undermining that facade. I think you can see through it as the audience, but he's also giving a good performance of someone who's convincingly not upset. You know,
definitely, yeah, I'd agree with that.
But we can see beyond that. But that's kind of why I wasn't so sure about the narration. Like, I don't really think I needed to be told how upset he was that his father left. Like, we know his father's been gone for 20 years, 30 years, a long time. And he looks visibly upset, especially when, you know, at the start of the film, when they're telling him, you need to go to Mars to talk to your father. You can see it on Brad Pitt's face. I don't think we needed narration telling us how difficult it all was for him.
It's the whole show tell thing, isn't it? Because the whole medium of film is like, what we've been taught is it's the best way to be a director is to show the audience, not tell the audience. That's something that sort of like we were told a lot at university, and it does feel a lot like you're being told a lot. There's a lot of sort of exposition about things in that respect with the narration. But at the same time, I quite enjoyed getting that sort of introspective look of what's going on in Brad Pitt's head. Yeah, it was more like if you were reading a book. When you read a book, the narration's all there, and it was that's the kind of sort of like vibe I got from it.
Yeah, I should say I had that thought enough to write it down, but this is a better narration than Harrison Ford's narration in Blade Runner. It is still a good vocal performance from Brad Pitt. He does some really good stuff with whispering, which is quite intense towards the second half of the film. It's an emotional, well-delivered narration, whereas if you watch that theatrical cut of Blade Runner, you do get the sense that it was slapped together pretty quickly at the request of the studio.
I always wanted to become an astronaut. Space is full of awe and wonder and mysteries to behold.
What did you think about the running time of Ad Astra? Because it's 2 hours and 3 minutes, so it's quite long. Like, there's been a lot of films out recently which are sort of like verging on 2 hours and a half, 3 hours. In the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is Brad Pitt's other big film, which he's been starring in recently, that was like going on 3 hours, I believe.
I haven't seen that yet.
So it's just sad. What did you think about the running time for this?
I don't even think 2 hours is a long film anymore. Like, I do prefer a film to be a nice 90 minutes. That's kind of the sweet spot. Yeah, Tron, thank you. But, you know, I don't... I didn't begrudge this film its length. It didn't actually feel that long. It moves along at quite a pace. It's divided up into quite neat little segments, isn't it? He described it as an odyssey, and in that kind of Greek sense of an odyssey, he's going on little mini adventures place to place.
Yeah, which is what I really liked about it. I liked all those set pieces. Yeah, because it's like in acts, isn't it? But it's very clearly in acts or chapters. If we're going back to the narration.
Yeah, definitely. And the set design complements that so well. The set design is so good. And it comes to a head when he is on Mars. So we haven't really talked about the basic plot of the film.
Yeah, let's go through the plot and sort of like work that out first.
We're assuming everyone listening has seen it, and probably quite recently. So he's an astronaut, but in this world, I thought it was interesting that the astronaut it's a less glamorous job than it is in our world, isn't it? He's more like a maintenance worker.
Yeah.
He works on this giant communications tower, and it's very important that it's a communications tower, I think. And he's doing some repair work at the start of the film. So he is definitely an astronaut, and he's given some respect by his colleagues and stuff that you would expect of an astronaut, but he's not doing the mind-blowing space exploration that we associate with being an astronaut. His father did that and went all the way out to Neptune, thank you, some 30 odd years ago, and disappeared 15 odd years ago. And now there's all these weird power surges that they think are being caused by his father's experiment on Neptune.
And it's causing lots of catastrophes on Earth, isn't it?
Yeah, like 50,000 people died in the most
Yeah.
recent one, which causes the destruction of the tower that he's working on at the start of the film. So they send him to Mars via the moon to send a message to his dad. His dad responds, but they won't share what the response is, and then they try and get rid of him and send him back to Earth. He commandeers a ship, flies all the way to Neptune, visits his dad, saves the world, tries to save his dad, comes back to Earth. That's the plot.
That's the plot in a nutshell. So it's basically Brad Pitt's character is trying to overcome his issues with his father.
He's trying to communicate with his father.
Yeah. It's like there's lots of things like that, which
Yeah.
are very much like the symbolism there is very like there's a bit at the end, he literally has to let him go. He lets go of his father. Yeah, there's bits like that which are very sort of like, again, on the nose for me, but they work.
Yeah, it's everything's pretty well done. Yeah, definitely. We were talking about the set design. I think it really comes to a head when he's on Mars and he sits in a little communication room. Do you remember that scene? It's red, and you've spent a lot more time in soundproof rooms than I have, I imagine.
That sounds like I've had a terrible time.
you've got the kind
Padded
of music.
rooms.
You've got the music knowledge.
Yeah,
and you know
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what the inside of that room looks like, but they do have stuff on the walls that is sometimes spiked, right? Is that right? And because it traps the...
Yeah, it looks like soundproofing in that
Yeah.
room. Yeah.
But it's a really extreme, surreal version of it, isn't it? It's very long, flat, jagged red spikes. It's very intense and terrifying. It looks like a really unpleasant place to be.
Everything's accentuated in that room, isn't
Yeah.
it? I suppose what they're trying to say is like if you're communicating with someone out in Neptune, you need to have more sound insulating stuff, and it needs to be more impressive. And I think it's a simple way of getting that across.
I think that's a very literal read of it. And something I liked about this film was all of this set design had very literal reasoning that could be applied to it. But I also think that was very just deliberately surreal. You know, there's something about those spikes crushing in on Brad Pitt. It's saying something about his mental state when he's all boxed in at that point, and he's desperately trying to carry out his mission, which is send this scripted message to his father that he hasn't spoken to in 15 years. And that's the point in the film when he does finally break. So everything up to this point has been all about his ability to be completely emotionless. He's introduced as a character whose resting heart rate has never gone above, is it 60? I don't know a lot about heart rates.
I think it's 80, I think.
Okay.
Whatever it is, it's a steady heart rate.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know anything about heart
doesn't
rates,
change.
but I knew enough to know, that must be low.
So I worked on a game show a while back called 1,000 Heartbeats.
Okay.
And basically we had all of the contestants with heart monitors when they were answering questions.
Right.
And most of them would go sort of anything from 100 to over 140, like 70, 80 is a good sort of resting.
Right. But it's made very clear in the film that resting heart rate he has is impressive, that he's able to maintain that under extreme stress.
Yeah.
And that's the reputation that he's living on, and it's the only reason he's been sent on this mission. He does want to go on this mission for his own reasons, but that's the kind of reputation that gets him there.
Yeah, because the fact he doesn't panic, he's very robotic, isn't he? He follows orders, and it's interesting you talk about him sort of like being trapped in this sort of like box. This is the moment where he escapes as well, and
Well, not quite. What I found really interesting is he goes back and forth into that scary red room at least once, and I think I'm getting it right in my head and remembering it correctly. He goes in and he delivers that message a couple of times by the script, and they're not getting a response. And in between, he goes into the comfort room. We see the comfort room for the first time, which is a really interesting concept. And when he's in the comfort room, in between the scripted messages, that is the first time we see a really emotional response from him. He's pacing about the room. He's panting. He's got his hands on his head, on his face. He's like visibly worked up. And I thought it was really interesting that he'd gone from that scary, spiky room where he's delivering this emotionally wrought but covered up without emotions message, and then he's supposedly going into a space that's supposed to comfort him. And that's the time when he looks the least comfortable at that point in the film.
But he does, there is that one moment where he breaks off and he sort of goes, why can't I listen to the message?
So yeah, he comes back from the comfort room, and that's when he goes off script, and that is the best scene in the film for me. He goes off script and he says something like, "I want to see you again, Dad," and he doesn't get really worked up. He just lists off a few memories that he has with his dad.
Yeah.
And they let him do it, don't they?
Yeah, and the memories are sort of called back later on as well, because he mentions he mentioned the musical, watching black and white musicals with you growing up, and it's something about the way he was brought up.
That becomes quite twisted at the end, I thought, because there's a black and white musical playing on the lab when he finally gets to his dad, but it's playing to corpses, isn't it?
It's like the ship's littered with dead bodies.
Yeah, so it's a unpleasant way to have to revisit that memory for him and be surrounded by floating corpses.
And that's sort of like when he's going into the ship for the first time, and that's like his memory of he's potentially going to see his dad at that point. Yet his first sort of moment where it's harking back to his childhood is perverted by these dead corpses everywhere.
Yeah, and that's important because he doesn't get a terrible amount of closure, or he does get closure, but it's not maybe the way you might want that in an ideal situation if that was your situation.
Dad, I'd like to see you again. I recall how we used to watch black and white movies together, and musicals were your favorite. I remember you tutoring me in math. You instilled in me a strong work ethic. You should know I've chosen a career that you would approve of. I've dedicated my life to the exploration of space, and I thank you for that.
I did feel like a sense of closure at the end. I think the film's very nicely bookended in terms of the way it's the beginning and end.
Well, yeah, what did you... So the film starts and ends with the same... what sounds like narration, but it is actually him saying it in the story of the film. What did you think of that at the start, and then what did you think of it at the end?
So the start is very... So the main thing he's saying at the start is, he's got all these other things going on. He wants to escape. He wants to get away the whole time. And he says something like, I look at all these people and they see one thing and I'm always looking for the exit. So he says that at the beginning when he's walking past, going onto the ship.
That's not the opening narration. The opening narration is one of his psychological evaluations.
Yeah, so he repeats the same thing, doesn't he? He says,
I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm aware of my surroundings. I got a good night's sleep, no bad dreams, stuff like that. I thought it was really interesting. At the start of the film, it really felt like a mantra. So you've got none of the context that it turns out that that's actually at the end of the plot. And I thought that was something he was saying to himself in preparation for going on a mission.
I thought that he was saying that at the start, and then he says it again at the end, but it has a different meaning.
No, okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought that by the end of the film, I thought what was happening was we'd seen his debrief at the start of the movie, because also the movie starts with scenes of his face kind of shaking in the helmet, which is from the end scenes when he's, I think, behind the shield. I might be getting this wrong.
Did he have a beard at the beginning? Because he has a beard at the end.
Well, does he?
When he comes out of the ship.
But he's clean shaven both times he's reciting that speech.
Yeah.
He's in an orange suit, and it's not the suit that he lands in. So I don't know. Maybe it'd be worth seeing it again. But
So either way, you could look at that first scene as being the end scene. Because it's like I got a completely different meaning from that. I don't know if I was paying enough attention when I was watching it.
Yeah.
But I felt that there was like a bit when he was being briefed at the start, and he was doing his psych exam, but then he did it again at the end, and it's the same. He's doing the same mantra, but at that point, it means something different to him because he doesn't have that weight of like his daddy issues on him.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you can view it either way.
It'd be well worth seeing again, having seen both versions, to see is that the same bit of footage or not.
Yeah.
I would quite like to see that. But yeah, I took it as this mantra. It really reminded me I enjoy bringing everything back to Dune. It really reminded me of the litany against fear. The speech in Dune, they all recite to themselves, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. And they say it to like psych themselves up and gain like ultimate control of their mind and body. So you recite this message of, I'm not afraid, I am okay, I feel good. It really reminded me of that. But throughout the film, certainly in the plot of Dune, that is a really powerful thing they say to themselves, and there's no real question of that. Or it's really good at like defeating anxiety for them. In this film, there is a lot of him reciting things that I don't think he really means.
Can you remember anything in particular?
Every time he does a psych evaluation.
Because the psych things are... So I can't remember what he says exactly, but he says something about being conscious of your surroundings.
He says different things every time, but it's always on that same thing.
Yeah, he's like, I am fine. So he's like, he goes through what he's been up to, what's been happening on his journey. And each time he tries to keep that sort of like disconnect, that emotionless...
Yeah, a veneer of emotionless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this was one of the most interesting things about the film, because there's definitely... it felt like there was something about mental health that they were trying to talk about, because he is a man who is encouraged to talk about his feelings every day, which is something that is very popular at the moment in terms of men's mental health.
Yeah.
But I don't think he wants to talk about his feelings ever. And then as it goes on and we see the comfort room, that seems very much like a form of treatment. And he is completely resistant to it. He hates being in the comfort room. And it has the opposite effect on him. He's smacking the walls. He doesn't want to be in there. He gets really wound up in the comfort room. So I thought that was a really interesting take on that was maybe not completely in tune with what we see in the media at the moment about mental health.
Yeah. This whole idea of toxic masculinity is sort of like being perpetuated a lot at the moment. And this idea of sort of like, because as a man, you're supposed to hide your feelings and be strong and be this sort of like this rock of a person. It's interesting in this film because the way you just explained it, it makes a lot of sense, because everybody wants him to tell everyone about his emotions and things. Yet, being an astronaut, he has to feel no emotions. He has to be emotionless in order to do his job.
Yeah, but it's very clear by the end of the film that has ruined his life.
Yeah.
Right?
But they're constantly checking to see that he's still this emotionless person.
Yeah.
And that's why he is the best choice for this mission, because he has a disconnect from everything.
Yeah.
Yet he still has this relationship with his dad. So when they send him out, they bank on him being able to be disconnected from that relationship. Yeah, so they bank on him being emotionless so that they can get him to say this scripted thing, and then he will be happy to just go home.
Yeah.
They don't really expect him to have these issues that he clearly has.
Yeah, and he kind of ends up... He goes off script, and that is ultimately what resolves the issues of the film, isn't it? I don't think this film... It's not toxic, you know? It has a sort of positive view on I think, you know, on dealing with your issues and coming to terms with things. But it's not as straightforward as just towing the line of what we see in the media about talking about your feelings, basically. I think it's treading an interesting line between two schools of thought. Or it's just doing its own thing. Yeah,
definitely. And I don't think... Because obviously space is a great setting for this film, because... Brad Pitt's character he feels isolated. He feels like he can't show his emotions. He's disconnected from everyone. And being in space is the ultimate disconnect. You're out there in the middle of the stars. There's no sort of, there's no connection with anybody else. And it gets progressively worse as his story goes on, to the point where he is alone in space. And he has a bit of a mental breakdown, doesn't he, when he's on the way to Neptune?
I have to say I was a bit disappointed with that. I think that they could have done a lot more with that. He's not... He flies off to Neptune and he does it in about 80 days, doesn't he? Which... I'll come back to that, actually. But
have you been working out logically?
Okay, no, let's talk about that, because you know I get wound up about this.
Yeah, this is what I love, though.
And honestly, like, because we've had conversations about it, I do try to... I'm not trying to be nitpicky.
Yeah.
And I was really enjoying this film for the first half, and I was very happy. I think I just have like a suspension of disbelief limit, and this film hit it about halfway through. Specifically, it hit it for me when he goes through the underwater lake on Mars,
Yep.
which I didn't understand, but it was so cool. I was
looked
absolutely fine with it.
great.
Yeah, it was one of the best sequences in the film. It looks
Yeah.
amazing. Have you played Metal Gear Solid 3?
Yes.
In a way, it reminded me of this. You know the scene in that where you climb a ladder for like 10 minutes and the theme song plays
Yeah.
and nothing else happens? It really reminded me of that in the way that it's just a long, slow scene that you have to sit with and just like feel. And it was excellent.
That's a great comparison. I love that.
But it didn't make a lot of sense, but I was fine with it. But then he breaks onto the ship
Yeah.
by climbing a ladder and then just jumping in the back door. And immediately I was like, what's going on now?
Yeah, I was wondering how he was going to get on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the ship is blasting off when he's doing that. And he's just a bit sweaty. He jumps on, he accidentally kills everyone on board, which I also quite liked.
Oh God, that whole sort of weird fight sequence is
Yeah, because it was quite painful and quite sad.
Yeah.
And all the way he's saying, I'm not the enemy, I come in peace, all of this. And it all just goes horribly wrong. But then I got quite frustrated with the fact that it takes him 80 days to fly to the place where it took his dad 30 years to fly to. And I appreciate that technology in that universe accelerated across those 30 years, but they haven't sent anyone else out to go to his dad, have they? If it's just an 80-day trip,
Oh, this all went completely over my head.
why have they left it 30 years to go and rescue this mission?
Interesting.
But fine. And then he just gets to his dad and it all happens so quickly. I'm not one of those people that's always looking for like a conspiracy theory in a film. When people are like, oh, maybe it was all a dream.
Yeah.
I actually really hate that.
Yeah, but the All a Dream thing is such a
It winds me
cop-out.
up. I think you have to take a film at its word. So unless the film hinted that it was a dream, I don't think any of that, or it was all a pre-death hallucination. I just don't buy into any of that normally. But this film really had me thinking, like, is any of this happening? It's all happening so quickly and easily and conveniently. And I developed my own little conspiracy theory, because when he's on the lab with his dad, he sheds a tear and it's in zero gravity. And it's a lovely shot, and Brad Pitt, sheds a tear and it just rolls down his face. And my immediate thought was, it completely took me out of the moment, because I thought, well, he's floating. Why is the tear rolling down his face? It should just pop out into the air around him, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's no gravity. I've since read that, there's nothing to it. I looked that up, and apparently Brad Pitt wanted that removed after they shot that scene. He was like, "Can you remove that? I shouldn't have shed a tear because it's not realistic." And the director was basically just like, "I quite liked it. I think we can leave it in. It looks good." I just take that at its word. It's fine. But I guess what I'm saying is the second half of this film just stretched the limits of what I could believe.
Yeah.
It had a very dreamy sense as well at the end. When he's talking to his dad, he's looking up at him through a glass pane. You can't quite see his dad. He's obscured. It's very, very echoey. It felt like a dream sequence. Beyond that feeling, nothing suggests it was a dream sequence. So I do believe that the whole thing happened within the story. But it was very dreamy, that whole sequence with his dad.
You see, like, I've got a whole different like spin on all of that, because the reason that I like it so much is because it's depicting a hero's journey. It's like all these Greek myths.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like Odyssey thing, which I really liked about it. And it's like, so I read a book by Joseph Campbell, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And that basically goes on about how all traditional myths and folk tales kind of follow the same sort of structure of this hero's journey. So it begins with a call to action. So he's called out, and then he leaves sort of like his home, his village or whatever.
Is this the one where there's a point where they can turn around?
Yeah, so there's like, there's all these kind of bits to it, but it was very much, it just reminded me of Greek myths for some reason.
Yeah.
It had that Odyssey element to it. So yeah, he's called out. There's the transformative moment when he's sort of like deciding he's going to go against Spacecom and he's going to do his own thing. And then he gets there, and then he sort of like realizes, actually, when I go back, I'm going to take all these experiences with me and I'm going to be changed by it. And for me, that was just something which I really enjoyed. I love seeing stories like that.
I did like that as well. I feel like I'm slagging the film off quite a lot.
No,
but
it's good because
yeah.
these are all points which sort of like may have lacked or wasn't quite as good at doing.
Yeah, because what you just said there about him taking that back with him, I really like that, and I really felt that at the end of the film. Whatever mental health stuff he's been going through in the story of the film, ultimately, the decision he makes is to not drive people away, and he reunites with his wife, who he's explicitly written out of his life. The reason he gives, and I don't know if we can trust the reason, but the reason he gives is the job's too dangerous. But I think it's more than that. It's the mental state he was in was too dangerous. He didn't want to be close to people.
Because that's his kind of excuse for not having kids. He's like, the job's too dangerous. I can't like have these things to worry about on top of everything else.
It's not about the job though, is it?
No, it's about his own personal issues.
Yeah. But he has this transformative experience on Neptune, near Neptune, and he comes back and he's able to reunite with his wife, which I really liked. I really felt that.
It was great, and it was like a scene in a coffee shop. It was very clearly back on Earth. It was something recognisable. I like him just having a coffee, which just like, it felt really nice at the end.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just because I love coffee, but it just made me feel like really good. And then you see her just sort of in a soft focus. You can't really see Liv Tyler's character.
Not much of a character.
Not much of a character. And it's so again, comparisons. I kept thinking of Armageddon.
Right.
Because Liv Tyler, she's in there. Space Cowboys is the other one. So two of the actors, Tommy Lee Jones and
Donald Sutherland,
of course. I almost got there. Both in Space Cowboys. And Space Cowboys was like, when I saw Tommy Lee Jones in an astronaut suit, I was like, it's Space Cowboys. At one point, I even wondered if some of those shots of the pictures of him like in his astronaut suit were from Space Cowboys. And they just used that particular, like cheap, easy way around.
Tommy Lee Jones is one of those actors that you could cast him in a film now and there's a wonderful backdrop of professional photographs and footage to pluck from to create this life that the character might have had over the last 60 years because of the career he's had.
Yeah.
And the commander was?
It was my father, sir. The ship disappeared approximately 16 years into the mission. And no data was ever recovered. Deep space missions were halted after that.
Roy, we have something that might come as quite a shock to you. We believe your father is still alive near Neptune.
Shall we talk a little bit about these set pieces which sort of punctuate the film?
Yeah.
So the first one, I really like that first one, the communication tower.
Yeah, amazing.
Because the idea of a structure which is so tall that it's still on Earth, but it goes in outside of the atmosphere into space.
Yeah.
And you've got people like astronauts outside fixing it because it's just so high up.
The maintenance workers for a structure like that have to also be trained astronauts, trained skydivers as well.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I thought that was great. Yeah, I really liked that. And it starts with the action, doesn't it? When you see that scene, you don't know what to expect. And then suddenly, like, I don't know how long it takes, but Brad Pitt is falling. He goes to try and like shut down the power for the tower.
Yeah, he's explicitly heroic, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get an idea of his character straight away. He tries to sort of save them, and then he's falling. And any normal person falling from that kind of height out of the atmosphere, it looks like. Yeah, I wondered if he was going to burn up or something like that.
Yeah, I thought it might be a dream sequence because I was like, oh, he's fallen, he's jumped off the structure, he's freely jumped off it.
Yeah.
It was amazing. When it turns out he's in control, he starts radioing control, he's like, I'm in a spin. Do you remember Felix Baumgartner? I was obsessed with him. I think you remember, he was the guy who did the skydive from outer space.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a Red Bull sponsored world record thing. I think when I first heard about it, I was like, that sounds pretty silly. But like the week or so building up to it, the hype and the marketing was so good because, they were sort of doing like documentaries about him, about his training and stuff like that. And then the actual coverage of the event was just amazing because he had like a camera in his helmet. You got like I think you had a live feed of him looking out of the thing he jumped out of, which I think was some sort of balloon.
Wow. And
it was like an astronaut's view of Earth. You could see the whole curvature of the Earth and you could see, it was dark above the blue and then he jumps out. And it was really intense because I think he blacked out. And that was the danger of the jump. And I think he went into that was the whole risk of it was if you go into a spin, you'll black out.
Yeah.
And then you're going to die.
And that's exactly what Brad Pitt says,
yeah,
doesn't it?
Yeah. Look up the Felix Baumgartner jump. It's fairly
So it's exactly this, but in real life.
basically. Yeah, like well, apart from the fact that it was deliberate for Felix Baumgartner. Yeah, they took a lot of that. You don't want to go into a spin because the G-force will get you and you will black out. And you need to be able to control and time the release of your parachute, which is the whole point of the jump.
Yeah.
But I think I can't really remember because it was like I think it was like 2030. It was a good few years ago. But that was like the entire debate was this is entirely possible, but we can't really control if Felix is going to go into a spin. And it was basically he's going to jump out, and we're all just going to hope that if he gets into a spin, he will get out of it.
Shit.
Yeah.
So you're watching that, and it's literally could be. Do they stream it live?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Or if they didn't stream it live, maybe they didn't stream it live because that could have been a death on live TV. I think they might have like produced like an hour-long TV documentary that included all of the original footage, but I bet they probably didn't air it until after the fact. Actually,
That's crazy, though.
because they wouldn't risk airing a man
So they
jumping out of space and dying.
So James Gray was accurate in that.
There's a lot of really accurate
Yeah.
stuff, yeah. And he consulted with NASA scientists in producing this film. So all the stuff like zero-G blood was consulted. Can you fire a gun on the moon? That was consulted. So I think there's a lot of realism here, which is why it's interesting that he sort of took the artistic license with the teardrop and some other things that are a bit, But yeah, that's the opening set piece, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And then again, it's like the rest of the film is punctuated by these really quite intense action scenes.
Yeah, but they're not all intense, are they? The great set pieces, because the launch to the moon is great, isn't it? That is actually very 2001. The commercial space flight to the moon.
It's Virgin Atlantic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't. No, it's Virgin Intergalactic or something, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
But it's a Virgin.
It's a Virgin
yeah.
flight, and he pays for a blanket, and it's $125.
Which is a
I think
great
that's going to date the film more than anything.
Yeah.
When blankets do cost $125 on a plane in 10, 15 years.
Good point.
But it's a nice touch. It's very realistic but futuristic.
And like the airport's very commercial.
Yeah, when he gets to the moon, it's got like he lands on a base that looks like a moon base, but it's also got neon restaurant signs.
Yeah. And people are taking photos with people dressed up as aliens.
Yeah.
And it's very sort of touristy.
But they're all walking around in what seemed like normal gravity with suitcases and escalators on the moon, but then mixed in with that alien stuff. It's nice.
Yeah. And so what they talk about in the sort of like the society that's going on in the moon, there's some sort of war going on.
It's borderless.
Yeah. So there's
which is causing problems.
because there's miners who want to like mine for whatever they're mining on the moon.
Moon rock.
Moon rock. valuable moon rock and cheese. So that's what causes the next big action scene, isn't it?
Yeah, and this was another one of the best bits.
I
of the
really
film for me.
enjoyed this.
Yeah,
'Cause
car chase on the moon.
Yeah, a car chase on the moon. And I feel like they did this really well.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't loads of sound,
Yep.
which is accurate.
Lots of heavy breathing.
Yeah, heavy breathing. And then if you did hear anything, it was kind of, I imagined it to be what Brad Pitt would be hearing.
There's a great bit where they just drive off the side of a crater and they're spinning, and of course it's 1/6 gravity, so it's like a sort of San Francisco car chase where they go over the hills.
Yeah.
But it takes like 10 seconds to just cruise down. It's great.
Yeah, I loved that scene. And then the other big action scene was the bit with the baboon.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're going to talk about
Yes,
the
let's
baboons.
talk about this because obviously,
It was bad, right?
yeah, it was very unexpected, but I kind of liked how surreal it was, I've got to say.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, but if you're not liking the sort of dream
No,
sequence element.
No, I am. I think I do
Yeah.
like the dream sequence elements, but
I think out of all the bits, this was the most like, it's seemingly random.
yeah.
Yeah. Because there's no real explanation. They get a distress signal. And I assumed it was going to be something to do with this war that's going on the moon, or people trying to stop Brad Pitt's character, from getting where he needs to go.
Yeah.
But no, it's just like a vessel which has been abandoned. It seems like it's been abandoned. You find out that there are these animal test subjects, these baboons. I think there's like a rat in there at one point.
There's a dead rat floating.
Yeah. And yeah, these baboons have got loose and they've basically killed the crew from what it looks like.
The weirdest thing was that the captain and Roy were wearing their helmets, so I assumed there was no atmosphere in there. And the baboons come out.
Yeah, crazy baboons.
I think I was expecting it to be completely empty, and for it to just be this horrifying mystery that goes unanswered, and then they have to go back to their ship and say it was empty, and then they carry on. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought that would be creepier than baboons in space.
Oh, but I really liked it.
Yeah, no, I don't mind it. Like, I do like all these
as well.
Yeah.
Because the damage it does to the other astronaut is just intense. Like,
Yeah.
smashes his
face,
visor.
eats his hand.
Yep,
it looked like a
eats
stumpy
his
little
hand.
hand. And Roy thinks he can just tape up the visor and take him back. I don't know
He's
what
clearly
Roy's plan
dead.
was.
He's clearly dead.
Well, if he's not dead, putting tape on his visor and taking him through space is not going to do him any good.
And he's got no nose as well. His nose has been taken out. And obviously there's like the sort of homage to 2001 with the sort of apes at the beginning of that.
Violent apes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of got those elements as well.
Talking about that crew, the crew of the Cepheus, there's another interesting thing about mental health treatment when we're introduced to them, isn't there? Because they take him on board and then they all just start feeding each other emotional
They're like
suppressant,
mood
mood
stabilizers.
suppressant tablets.
Yeah.
Because Spacecom
I think
doesn't
they
want
call
you
them
feeling emotions.
stabilizers because they're kind of like, they're meant to keep you stable.
Yeah.
Because going into space is something which is potentially going to make you unstable from the sounds of it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And
so
we see
so
later
we see
on, yeah.
for 2 hours and 3 minutes.
Yeah, that was a very interesting point because why is there the need to take these mood stabilizers?
I can believe that you would, and I'll
Yeah.
bet that real astronauts probably are a little bit dosed up on some kind of tranquilizer, if only for like extreme travel sickness, probably. And if you were long-term deep space, I can see why that's sort of believable. What's interesting is it's another type of treatment for emotions, mood, mental health that Roy resists because he takes his tablet, pockets it, and then disappears, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't take his mood stabilizer because, again, he's resistant to these forms of therapy or ways of affecting his mood. He's got his own way of dealing with things, which he explicitly refers to as compartmentalizing, doesn't he? He says, my training, or I was trained to compartmentalize. And he says that when, I think it's the scene where he plans to leave a voicemail for his estranged wife, and then he deletes it, and he's obviously upset, and then he goes and does a psych evaluation and passes it because he's compartmentalizing. It seems unhealthy.
Yeah, it's very unhealthy.
Well, that's the thing. It seems unhealthy, but it works.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt
it's
does
tricky.
save the day with this kind of maverick behavior.
But because he's been bottling up all these emotions, they sort of cause some of this catastrophe later on.
What catastrophe? Oh, the 4 people who die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that.
Yeah, just that slight bit.
Yeah. And then he's got to deal with that. I think what we were talking about before was that I felt like they didn't make enough of him in space because I really felt like, so after he's commandeered the ship and he's accidentally killed the crew, he's wrought with guilt and then he's got 80 days alone. And you were talking about space being this setting for dealing with loneliness. I just felt like it breezed over that too quickly. And that's when it started to feel very surreal that he was able to get to Neptune in 70 days in terms of the plot and in about 10 minutes in terms of the film. And it lost me there in 2 ways. It wasn't just the fact that I felt it was unrealistic. It was that I really wanted to see more loneliness in space. You've read The Explorer, haven't you?
Yeah. I kept thinking about that watching this film.
Well, I kept wanting that. I think I just want a movie version of The Explorer.
Yeah.
It's strongly recommend it to anyone listening. It's an incredible sci-fi novel that really gets into loneliness in space and how awful it would be to deal with feelings of loneliness and guilt in a spaceship that is accelerating away from Earth. And this film had an opportunity to really do that, and it didn't.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I feel like it did have those moments, but I think it's more about with this particular film, he is lonely in himself, like anyway. So you don't, because they've already hammered home how sort of disconnected he is. So that even when he is out in space on his own, he's still as lonely as he's ever been. It's just accentuated a little bit more. So perhaps they didn't need to linger on it for too long, because the whole film has been lingering on his disconnect and his sort of like loneliness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be my only sort of like argument slightly against that. But I see what you mean, because they could have done more with the whole, because it's a great setting to express loneliness and existential crisis, because that's what most space films are doing at the moment. I know I haven't seen it yet, but Aniara, I think that's how you pronounce it, it's supposed to be a really good sort of existential dread filled film. So Aniara, Gravity's sort of like that as well, I would say.
I don't know. Gravity is much more of a tense adventure, isn't it? I don't think Gravity deals with loneliness.
But George Clooney dies, doesn't he? And
Yeah.
she's on her own.
But I didn't think that film explored that theme so much.
Yeah, it was more sort of
It's breakneck speed, that film. I think there's one scene in that film, I haven't seen it since it came out actually, but there is a scene where the whole film takes a big deep breath and she imagines George Clooney showing up at the door of her ship.
Yeah.
And she lets him in and he's fine. And then she wakes up, or she realizes he's not there. That's the only bit that I really remember that was really dealing with that sense of, oh my God, I'm all alone up here. It's
But
terrifying.
I feel like with that film, it's all down to what she does on her own. So I suppose it's not loneliness in the same way, but it's sort of it's being the only person who can affect your fate. You can change your sort of trajectory. And it literally comes down to that, doesn't it?
She's a propelling force.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is another way this film, Ad Astra, expresses that kind of existential crisis. What did you think of the soundtrack? What did it remind you of?
What did it remind you of? Because I can't think, because
Well, halfway through the film, I thought this really feels like The Leftovers. And then as soon as the credits were rolling, I saw music by Max Richter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the same guy who did the score for The Leftovers. And I love him. I think he's my favourite working composer. My favourite thing of his that I know you also love is The Leftovers, which is an amazing show. I don't
Absolutely
know
brilliant.
Don't know if we'll ever talk about it because I'm undecided if it's sci-fi or not. But I'd be happy to talk about it one day. But the soundtrack for that is amazing. He's released a lot of very, very nice classical kind of albums that all somewhat sound the same. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Similar
I
sort of
love
tone.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did an amazing piece of work called Sleep, which is an 8-hour album.
8 hours?
Yeah, that is designed to be listened to overnight. And it was originally performed...
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, it was originally performed midnight to 8 a.m. In a concert hall with beds. So you had to book a bed.
Nice.
But with a real orchestra.
Although I would struggle with that because I can't really sleep with too much noise.
I mean, I would have loved to have experienced that, but I'm the same. I wouldn't want to listen to music all night. But he kind of worked on it scientifically so that it goes through movements to like match when your REM sleep is likely to happen and stuff like that.
Wow.
I think. I've never actually listened to that. He's also released an album version called From Sleep, which is sort of normal album length.
60 minutes.
Yeah. Even less, I think, maybe. But he's done. I think he did the soundtrack for Taboo. Did you watch that?
Oh, with Tom Hardy.
Yeah. So, and he's contributed a lot to other bits and pieces. Basically, he's a composer that's like, it's like he's figured out this magic formula for creating moodiness. And it's a swelling moodiness. Like he knows how to just get strings that swell up and make you feel very sad, basically. And he's very, very good at it.
And that is that's so essential for this film.
That is the bed of this movie throughout. I looked it up and I've been listening since. Unfortunately, there's only one track on Spotify, but it's kind of like the main theme by him. And it's very good. So I would check it out. If you just search Ad Astra, you will find it on Spotify. But on reflection, do you kind of get that same sense of, in The Leftovers, there'd be a lot of shots of Justin Theroux just sort of looking into the distance with an unnameable sadness on his face.
Yeah,
and some poignant music underneath.
That's it, yeah, because you really need to get that feeling from The Leftovers in particular, because it is about sort of what he's going through and sort of the inner sadness he's got, and he's carrying that around with him. And that's it, yeah, like we said, that's what's happening with Roy in this.
They're actually quite similar characters.
Yeah.
Sort of outwardly strong men with incredible pain that they don't know how to deal with and talk about, and daddy issues.
Exactly. That's a really good comparison, actually. Yeah, it's a really strong one.
And both amazing performances. And I'll happily say that Justin Theroux's performance is better than Brad Pitt's. I think Justin Theroux, criminally... Well, he's not underrated, because I think anyone who sees him in anything likes him, but he's just not in enough stuff.
Well, I feel with like The Leftovers, he had that time to sort of like really express his character over the course of the series, which is why you have a stronger connection to it. But I see what you mean. He was very good in that.
Yeah, I think for an actor, that series is a gift. For all the actors, actually. Yeah. I don't want to go too far off on a Leftovers tangent in this episode, but...
Liv Tyler's in it as well.
Liv Tyler's incredible in it. There's Carrie Coon. She's Justin Theroux's ex-wife. Christopher Eccleston. What they do in that show is they will give over an episode at a time to a different member of the cast, and then that actor just gets to deliver, the best performance of their career, and they get that opportunity 2 or 3 times across the length of the 3 seasons. Do you remember that scene where Christopher Eccleston is in the boot of his car, smuggling his wife either in or out of town?
Yeah.
And she's in her catatonic state, and he's reciting Bible verse while the car is like bouncing, and it's really intense, and in this deep red light in the middle of the night. And it's just one of the best performances I've ever seen. That show, if anyone listening hasn't seen Leftovers, do check it out.
Yeah,
for
go and watch Leftovers, definitely.
The best acting I've ever seen, I think. What other big set pieces were there that you liked in Ad Astra?
Not necessarily set pieces, but I really liked how different each of the stages were. I think we mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but each planet and each part of the journey was very distinct.
Yeah.
It was very styled in a particular way, because obviously the moon was this sort of commercial spot, but it was quite dead and grey. Obviously the moon looks like that, but the way they really... in the architecture of the buildings.
Yeah, they bring the moon inside.
Yeah, so there's that. And then Mars was very sort of like they all live underground. And there's dark passageways and red, like everywhere's red. And it's very stylized.
Very stylized. And again, talking about that surrealism that does have a sense of believable literalness to it. When he first meets Ruth Negga, the director of operations, is that her role?
Yeah,
of the
we
Mars
find
station.
out has a deeper connection to the story as well.
She's standing in this deep red corridor and talking directly into the camera, and as they're talking, just pure darkness sweeps in behind her.
Yeah,
and you totally believe that might be something that happens on a Martian subterranean base, but it's just really surreal that the darkness is creeping in all around. It's another great moment where that surrealism just breaks into the reality of the film.
Yeah, because Ruth was one of the few female characters in the film in general. But did you also spot Natasha Lyonne?
No, because I don't watch Orange is the New Black, but I since have looked it up.
Yeah, so she was she was a secretary character kind of thing in Mars when Roy first gets there.
Yeah. And
I read a review during the week. Apparently James Gray lived next door to her.
Okay.
And for a while, and then was like, I really want to get you in my film. And wanted her to play this sort of like 1930s like American kind of secretary character.
Right.
It's deliberately in there because it seems really out of place, just seeing her being herself basically in this world where everyone's quite emotionless and just doing a job.
Yeah, there's interesting comedy roots to this film. Like, he's obviously put her in because he's got that friendship with her, and Jamie Kennedy's in it, but he's like invisible, or in the sense that I didn't recognize him at all until I saw his name in the credits.
Who was Jamie Kennedy?
I'm pretty sure he's the he's the guy who takes over from the director of operations and is in charge behind the desk when Roy's sending the messages. The guy, he's got glasses and long hair.
Oh, geez, I didn't realise that was him.
I think so, yeah. I mean, he was definitely in the cast at the end, and that's the only person that I thought looked enough like Jamie Kennedy. But it's a very it's not Jamie Kennedy from Scream. It's a very serious, quite menacing performance.
Definitely. All those characters sort of like behind that desk are very menacing. The kind of like organization element of it. They make a big point about Spacecom, don't they? Ruth's character says that they wanted to sweep the real story under the rug. They don't want people to know what's really going on. And that is being reflected in what Roy's character's doing. He's hiding his real emotions. Spacecom are hiding their true, like, what's really going on underneath this facade of being this very corporate, they know what they're doing, they're sort of like sorting things out. Really, there's lots of shit going on underneath it.
I'm not sure if the film thinks that's a bad thing or not, because Spacecom don't get exposed, do they? They, for better or worse, they get away with that. The cover-up that they've constructed, it seems to remain the truth by the end of the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems like everybody's got like another layer they're hiding. Like there's the astronaut who's one of the co-pilots who turns out to be really scared of going out to like explore that other vessel. So he's hiding that side, that he's actually not as sort of on it as these other pilots. And then Ruth's character, who seems quite stern, is hiding this really big secret that her parents were working with Tommy Lee Jones, Brad Pitt's dad, and Tommy Lee Jones's character had killed Ruth's parents, and she knows because she got a message from them or something like that. So there's always there's lots of secrets and lots of things going on underneath the surface layers of these characters. Not that there's that many characters in there, but it seems to be a lot about that.
Yeah, there's a different side to everything, yeah.
So I think a lot of people that have watched the film have sort of said that it's kind of towing the line between quite haunting and surreal and over-the-top melodrama. Would you agree with that? And would you say, which sort of side do you think it veers towards more? I
think the surrealism is what stuck with me the most, and I think that's the thing that I'll remember about the film the most. And I'm undecided about how much I like that. There's stuff about that, like I said, the communications booth, I loved, especially in contrast to the comfort room with all its projections of supposedly serene life on Earth,
like birds and
waves,
flowers.
Yeah, the contrast of those two things, right at the sort of center point of the film, was really, really good. And obviously, we've talked a bit about how there was some other surreal stuff that I really didn't like because it took me out of it. But on balance, that's my takeaway from it. So I guess that is the thing I like the most about it. What about you?
Yeah, I loved all the surreal stuff, and I've said that's what really drew me in. But I don't know about the melodramatic element, because some of it does. Because we said at the beginning, some of it seems a bit on the nose, and it is kind of melodramatic. It's about a guy with daddy issues, and he's trying to sort of like rectify his relationship with his father throughout the entire film, and that's sort of like his driving force. And the whole time he's lamenting on that throughout the entire journey. Yeah. He doesn't, it takes him a long time to get past that. But then I suppose that is a real thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm sweeping it under the rug a little bit by just going daddy issues every time. But because I know this is like a real thing that sometimes people are dealing with.
Absolutely.
Because how you're brought up affects your adult life so much.
Yeah.
But it is treated a little bit melodramatic in this. I feel, just because the way Brad Pitt is sort of carrying himself.
There's a sense of, I'm trying to think of like if there's a connection to like classical melodrama, like 60s stuff, 50s, 60s stuff. Like there is a sense that he's someone who has to go and deal with his emotions, this big emotional weight that he has. He has to go and deal with that so that he can come back and just deal with, getting his life back on track again. you talked about it in terms of the hero's journey, but there's a sort of kitchen sink, domestic storyline there that has to be repaired by the end of the movie. And it involves going to, unbelievable lengths and efforts to resolve something internal for him before he can just come back to that fairly simple domestic life that he actually really wants.
Yeah, and it's that because he's obviously lived his whole life in his father's shadow as well. There's this big thing where when he meets the other astronauts, they all go, "Oh, your dad was a legend. He did all this.
Yeah.
Wasn't he great?" And he's constantly being compared, even though he, like in his own right, is a fantastic astronaut. He's doing all these crazy things during these action sequences that no normal person would really do.
Yeah.
And he's proving himself time and time again, yet he's always being compared to his dad, and he's in his father's shadow the whole time.
Yeah.
So when he finally does meet his dad, that sort of like reunion's a bit strange as well, isn't it? Because they're a bit disjointed when they're chatting to each other.
Yeah. Brad Pitt's arming a bomb.
Yeah, which is a great greeting.
Yeah.
And he's just sort of like, "Hi, Dad."
Yeah.
And it's quite subdued.
He's still doing that emotionless cover-up, isn't he? This
Yeah.
must be... He hasn't seen his father in 30 years, and we know by this point in the film that has ruined his life, destroyed his marriage or relationship. And then, that's what he says, "Hi, Dad." But then again, what would you say?
He must be going through so many different emotions at that point, but he can't properly vocalize it at that time. And then after chatting to him, he finds out that his dad's stayed on the vessel, stayed on this spaceship, and wouldn't let the rest of the crew go because he was determined to find life out there. He wanted to prove there was alien life, there was other intelligent life other than us. And the answer to that, on the surface, seems a bit bleak, doesn't it?
Well, he's been unsuccessful
Yeah.
for 30 years. And actually, Clifford wants Roy to stay with him, and actually Clifford would happily spend another 30 years or the rest of his life. And it's not a huge deal for him that his sons showed up. And actually his reaction to that is, "Oh, okay, good. My son might be interested in continuing the research." So he accepts him, but only on the terms of
Yeah,
he'll
because
stay as a
he
colleague.
gets to that point, because at first he says, "I didn't care about you or your mother.
Yeah, that's
Like,
horrible.
I just wanted to, I had this. This was much more important to me than you ever were." And he says, "I didn't think about you."
Do you see why that's got a dreamlike quality to it, though? Because it's like he said all the things that Brad Pitt's therapist might get Brad Pitt to say to himself, or that his therapist might say to him. It's like he's immediately getting all the issues out in the open, and he says, "I never cared about you."
Yeah.
That's exactly what Brad Pitt's character has been afraid of for 30 years.
He says the worst case scenario,
Yeah,
doesn't he?
yeah.
That's the worst thing you could hear.
It is like a therapy session played out. What would be the worst thing for your father to say to you after 30 years of absence? Well, if he told me he didn't care about me, that'd be pretty awful. And he says it.
Yeah.
That's why it had that dreamlike quality. It was it was so direct, and so to the emotional point. We've been saying on the nose throughout, but actually that was very deliberate in that scene, wasn't it?
And it was interesting the fact that they were separated even when they first meet, because Clifford is above him on the railings or whatever it is, and then he's further down.
Yeah, he's still out of reach. Isn't
Yeah,
he?
and he's still sort of he's literally looking up to his dad still at that point. There's lots
Yeah.
of little bits like that, which on the surface, there's lots of, it's all very deliberate.
Yeah. So he does eventually. I was a little unclear on how he really convinced his dad that it was a lost cause and convinced him to come out of the ship. But I think his dad had just given up a little bit at that point, hadn't he?
So Roy makes the point of saying that his dad had seen all these amazing things and he hadn't properly realised what he'd been seeing. So I think the point they try to get to is if we are the only sort of intelligent life out there, then it's all down to us.
We're all we've got.
Yeah, we're all we've got. So
Yeah.
we've really got to focus on the here and now and sort of like these relationships we have and what we're doing.
Yeah. But I mean, Roy's telling himself that at that point.
Yeah.
Isn't he? Yeah.
But
Because that's the message he takes back to Earth.
yeah, because Clifford has basically ignored all of that
Clifford can't process that.
Yeah, he can't do it. And then you get the scene where they finally part ways. You think, okay, maybe he's going to take his dad home, but then you kind of in the back of your head, you know this can't happen. And then so Clifford just kicks off away, and he's going closer to Neptune and closer out of reach. But Roy grabs him and holds on, and then Clifford just says,
He literally says, let me go. Yeah.
Let me go.
Yeah.
And then he has to. And then that's basically sort of like leads into the end of the film.
Yeah, which was crazy because he then jumps through the rings of Neptune. I didn't understand why they were trying to get on that like propeller thing. And it's quite a long scene because Brad Pitt's trying to do that, and then he has to say goodbye to his dad, and then he gets back on it, and I was like, why is he getting on this big rotating thing? And then he's pulling a panel off for like 5 minutes.
Because this is like the last sort of action scene, isn't it? Yeah.
And then you sort of realise, I don't know if you were supposed to know all along, but he rips that panel off to use as a shield. No, you weren't supposed to know all along, because this is a mad sequence,
no,
right?
it's mad, but it does. You can't properly work it out. At least I couldn't when I first watched it. I knew he was going to do something strange, but...
Yeah. He grabs the panel, he holds it as a shield, and then he kind of springs off the rotating, I think it's like a satellite dish communication thing, with enough force to ping him through the rings of Neptune. So with my nitpickiness, I haven't gone as far as looking up how deep or thick the rings of Neptune are that a man could ping through it. Because it's a big planet, right? I don't know. Right. I don't mind. It's fine. He does it. And then he just happens to get back to his ship. Everything just seems like...
He sees the glint, doesn't he? So he knows it's there. So he can it's like his character is the hero. He's
a
like,
hell of a hero. Everything's
the action guy. He can do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you saw like Bruce Willis's character in Die Hard.
Obviously, Bruce Willis could make the jump, James.
So why are you saying Brad Pitt can't?
Because he's really sad.
He's too sad.
He's too sad to jump through the rings of Neptune, in my opinion. Bruce Willis wouldn't be so sad at that point. He'd be mad.
If it was Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger,
yes, they would do that. Punch their way through the rings of Neptune. They wouldn't need the metal panel.
But sad Brad
needs the panel. It's just it's this whole like everything's a 1,000,000-to-1 shot in the second half of the film. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he does. He makes it back to the ship, and then another 1,000,000-to-1 shot is that he uses the shockwave of the nuclear explosion to blast him all the way back to his wife.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. And he goes straight back to Earth. There's no...
And he has a coffee.
Yeah. Brilliant.
No, it was good. It was good.
But when you put it like that...
I was quite exhausted by all the 1,000,000-to-1 shots.
Yeah. I can see what you mean.
I'm using the shockwave of the nuclear explosion to send me back to Earth. If I don't make it, please recover the ship.
Because it's got all this great stuff that my dad spent his entire life.
I plugged a big USB in, and I've downloaded 30 years of data.
So I've got a really big USB stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
So he makes it home, and it's a happy ending, and it is a satisfying ending, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I felt fulfilled by the ending of Ad Astra. It tied up all the loose ends. He'd made it all the way to Neptune. He'd made it all the way back home. He was about to reunite with his life and his wife. He's back on track. And I was just like, oh, he's no longer sad. He's no longer sad, Brad Pitt.
Yeah. Yeah, it was satisfying. I did like it. Yeah. And I think all that surreal stuff on balance, I can live with. And I would watch it again.
You would watch it again?
Once.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of like modern day sci-fi films, would you say it's gonna last the test of time?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So not in the same way that something like today, I would say Ex Machina will last. Mm-hmm. I would say further back, obviously 2001 has lasted.
Yep.
It's not going to have the same impact as that.
I don't think it's as visually stunning as 2001, and I think it's hitting the same emotional points as Interstellar, and I think Interstellar did those emotional points much better. So that's why I don't think it's going to be a classic, but I think it's a really solid sci-fi space movie.
It's interesting as well because space seems to be sort of in vogue at the moment. There's quite a few new space films coming out. Obviously, I mentioned Aniara. There's also Lucy in the Sky coming out before long, which is Natalie Portman in space.
Great.
So that's directed by the guy. Have you ever seen Legion?
The TV show?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the first season.
So Legion's very sort of surreal.
Very stylized.
And I think by the fact that this film is called Lucy in the Sky,
Yeah.
it's going to be quite surreal as well.
Yeah.
So there's that one. There's another one as well, which is not in space, but it feels like it's doing sort of like a similar thing. So Christian Stewart's also in sort of like a kind of, I would say it's kind of like an astronaut thing, but it's going into the world of under the water this time in a film called Underwater. So there's lots of sort of like journey films coming out at the moment, and they've always got like a big star dealing with some sort of loneliness. At least that's what it's looking like. And I feel like there is a trend. A First Man is another good example. Ryan Gosling plays a very similar character to Brad Pitt in Ad Astra, except he doesn't have any of the narration, and his character is solely sort of like, you get all of this idea the same way that we get about Roy in this through just his character. So I think if you've not seen that, that's a good one to sort of watch in comparison to this, seeing it without narration and just seeing how that affects the tone of it.
Okay, I'll check that one out. And of course, we've got Dune coming out soon.
Yes. June is on the horizon. Don't worry, Matt. It'll be here before you know it.
And we'll be definitely doing another episode like this for Dune.
Definitely. I think you'd probably kill me if we didn't do it.
I'll probably be doing about 12 of these episodes when Dune comes out.
I think you might have to set up a whole new podcast just for that.
Yeah, all right.
Excellent. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast, as always.
Normal services will resume next week. We'll be back onto our AI series for you.
Yes, things will be back to normal next week. So yeah, tune in then.